Good day, everyone. Welcome to our English 113, the Teaching and Assessment of Grammar class. I am Annie B. Azarcon, your reporter for today. For today's discussion, we are now on how to teach grammar from rules. Specifically, we'll only focus on sample lesson 1 using a rule explanation to teach question formation for pre-intermediate. In the presentation, the teacher uses an illustrated explanation to highlight a feature of English syntax, or what we call the word order. The same kind of presentation could be used with a little adaptation for teaching other syntactic structures, such as the passive, reported speech, embedded questions, do you know where the bank is, or cliff sentences, what I like about London is. Step 1. The teacher writes on the board the sentence, "The president phoned the queen." After that, she then asks them to identify the subject of the sentence as well as the verb and the object. On the given example, we will identify the subject, the verb, and the object. The president phoned the queen. The subject there is the president, the verb is phoned, while the object is the queen. Take note that the English word order typically follows the SVO pattern, or the subject, verb, object pattern. Step 2. The teacher then erases the president and substitutes someone. Instead of the president phone the queen, it will now someone phone the queen. She elicits, or in the event of not being able to elicit it, she provides the question, "Who phoned the queen?" She writes this question and the answer on the board. She numbers the exchange to 1, and it will look like this. Someone phoned the queen. Who phoned the queen? Of course, the president. She then returns the original sentence. The president phoned the queen. And finally, she rubs out the queen, substituting someone. After that, she then elicits or models the questions and its answers and write them on the board, and it will look like this. She then asks the students to study the two questions and to think about the difference between the subject question number 1 and the object question number 2. Step 3. The teacher explains the difference, pointing out that the two form questions about the subject of the sentence requires no change in word order. As you can see and observe in the given example, someone phoned the queen follows the SVO pattern, or the subject, verb, and object. Same goes with the sentence, "Who phoned the queen?" Whereas, to form questions about parts of the sentence after the verb, in this case, the object, does require a change in the standard word order. This change in word order is what we call the inversion. In the case of our example, the inversion is achieved by unpacking the verb phoned into its components, did plus phone, and then enlisting the auxiliary did to perform the inversion. The whole process looks like this. Who did the president phone? Step 4. The teacher then places 4 pictures of famous people, or in the absence of pictures, their names, and connects them with arrows. For example, we have Madonna, the Pope, Martina Hingis, and Michael Jackson. She explains that the arrow represents phone calls. She asks a variety of questions. For example, who phoned Madonna? Who did Madonna phone? Or else, who did the Pope phone? She asks the students to continue this activity in pairs. She then invites them to make new phone networks by changing the names of the people in the diagram, and to continue the questions and answer activity. For fun, she completes this activity by asking students, why did Madonna phone the Pope, do you think? Step 5. The teacher writes on the board, "Who phoned you yesterday, this morning, or last weekend?" Who did you phone yesterday, this morning, last weekend? She asked the students to ask and answer the questions in pairs. As the students are doing this, she successively erases the questions from the board in order to win them off of dependence on the written form. She then asked individual students to report what they have found out to the whole class. The following are the alternative or additional questions might be. Let us now move on to our discussion. The success of a good explanation depends in part on the student's understanding of the meta-language, the terminology used. In step 1, it aims to establish from the outset the terminologies necessary to explain the difference between subject and the object questions. Step 2 establishes a contrast between two grammatical forms, in this case, subject questions and object questions, with a view to raising the student's awareness of the difference. A similar contrast could be made between, for example, active and passive sentence. A man bit the dog. A dog was bitten by a man. Or between the direct and reported speech. He said, I am hungry. He said he was hungry. Or between two aspects of the same tense. I read a book last night. I was reading a book last night. The principle operating here is that it is often easier to establish a language rule in students' mind by contrasting two forms that are different in only one. These are known as minimal grammar pairs. The same principle holds true for teaching pronunciation. Example, by contrasting minimal pairs such as sheep and sheep. Note that the teacher asks the students simply to think about the difference but not necessarily to verbalize it. Doing this gives the learner unpressured time in which to reflect on and understand the material being presented. Sometimes, language learning is a silent activity. This does not necessarily mean it is passive. In step 3, having engaged the students' curiosity and having primed them to be prepared for a grammar explanation, the teacher explains the language point. She also uses the board to provide a visual reinforcement of her explanation. Step 4 is designed to test the learner's grasp of the rule and to prepare them for independent practice. Notice that initially, the students simply have to distinguish between the two sorts of question without at this stage producing them. The exercise restricted to the verb form is linguistically very controlled so that the learners are not overburdened with, for example, new vocabulary. They are free to devote maximum attention to the grammar contrast. The students are then allowed some less teacher practice, with the opportunity of providing their own content to the exercise. Step 5 continues in the direction of greater freedom and creativity by offering the students a chance to personalize the language point, also by having them report on their findings. Step 5 encourages them to each other with the focus and meaning as much as on form. Got it? We are now in our evaluation, the E factor. The efficiency of this approach depends on the kind of rule being explained, and also on the teacher monitoring the learner's degree of comprehension at every stage of the explanation, and responding immediately to any problems they might have. If the rule is a relatively simple one, then this approach can be extremely economic in terms of time. A simple rule might be one that involves a simple manipulation of elements, such as the active-to-passive operation, or one where there is a straightforward relation, with few or no exceptions, between a form and its use, such as the case of the third persons and present verb. Simple verb, he works. The grammar explanation approach is also very easy, in that it involves a few of any materials and requires little or no preparation. It is therefore probably one of the most efficient ways of dealing with grammar problems that might arise in the course of a lesson as a result, for example, of a student's error. There have been a number of research studies comparing the efficacy of deductive and inductive approaches to grammar teaching. But on the whole, results have been inconclusive. There is no doubt due to the number of variables involved. Example, the students preferred learning styles and the teacher's explanatory skills. A key factor seems to be the kind of item being taught. Some grammatical items seem to lend themselves to a deductive treatment, and the others to an inductive one. One problem in the minimal pairs approach to grammar presentation is the lack of context. The difference, for example, between I read a book last night, I was reading a book last night, may in the more of context be difficult for the students to locate. For the A factor, as has been pointed out earlier, the deductive approach is particularly appropriate for adult learners whose learning style and expectations predispose them to a more analytical and reflective approach to language learning. This, of course, means that it will not be suitable for learners who would rather learn through the experience of communicating, and it is particularly inappropriate for very young learners. Abstract grammatical concepts such as subject, object, and even verb are beyond their grasp. Finally, whatever the style of the learners, over prolonged chalk and talk presentation will soon tire the most attentive students. As a rule of thumb, the shorter, the better. That would be all. Thank you for listening and lending your time for watching my video presentation. I hope you learned something. Thank you and God bless.